I welcome all our distinguished speakers of the session who are here with us today. Some of our speakers are also joining virtually. Also, I request our speakers to please come onto the stage. I request our moderator, Dr. Ashok Khosla, Chairman and Founder, Development Alternatives, to initiate the session. Thank you.
Thank you. I want to welcome you all to this session on a just transition, which is at the moment restricted to a low carbon future, but I believe we have to look at a sustainable future in a broader sense, including the ecosystems that we depend on. And I'm going to take the unusual step in this conference to ask for a slideshow, because I think, despite the fact that we have a panel, visuals carry a great deal more weight than simply words. And I'm going to ask the operators to put my slideshow on the screen so that I can introduce the subject and then introduce the speakers. May I ask for the slideshow, please? Is it possible? Is it possible to have the slideshow? Okay, while we wait for the slideshow, let me introduce the speakers. Thank you. I'm sorry, I didn't realize it. So we will have three speakers in this session. First is Dr. Camilla Roman. She's speaking from Geneva. She will be on the screen. She's a policy specialist in green jobs and the transition to sustainability at ILO in Geneva. And she's been working on these issues for a long time, both in Asia and at the headquarters of ILO. She will be followed by Mr. R. Venkatesh, who is the managing director of a big marine company, Wärtsilä, India, and he will be talking about the experiences he's had in managing the energy and marine work of the company and of that sector. And then he will be followed by Mr. Chandra Bhushan, who is the president and CEO of the International Forum for Environment, Sustainability and Technology, iForest, who will be addressing some of the more specific political issues of such as just transition. So let me just share a few thoughts with you on what I believe we have to keep in mind when we talk about these issues. We need to look at where we are, where we come from, where we are, and where we're going in terms of improving the lives of our people. You know, as all of you know, it's a truism that we exist in a country which is actually two countries, side by side, the same place, the same time, but virtually living in parallel lives. There is India with some 500 million people in the middle class who live probably as well as people in any part of Europe or North America, have access to all the things they want. And then there are about 900 million people who live in Bharat who got basically left behind, whose even basic needs are not often met. The most basic purpose of national development, I believe, is to bring about a healthy, fulfilling life for all now and in the future. And a better Bharat has to recognize what we've inherited in the way of ideas, concepts, institutions, and how that relates to where we are. The inheritance in our mindset about the economy is really a major part of the story. GDP is king, more FDI, our newspapers and media shout from their headlines, growth, higher Sensex, basically bringing in more foreign investments, and so on. The liberalization of our economy, the policies for giving incentives to business for higher efficiency, for less regulation, for global markets, for basically to do this with austerity for those who cannot make an impact on the policies. So it's all about consumption, higher level of access to things, and privatization, and less taxes. And to legitimize these current practices, we talk about CSR and sustainability and charity and inclusion. These are words that trip very easily off the mouths of our business leaders: net zero, philanthropy, ESG, and what we're talking about here, just transition. The issues that I'd like to bring to you is that you can't have a just transition if you have the current kind of economic policies or theories. To legitimize business, you now need to look at our present predicament, which is a result of these economic policies. We live, some of us, in India very well. We have beautiful houses, we have malls, we have runaway consumerism, and we have an income distribution which is grossly lopsided. This income distribution, which looks like a bar stool, has almost all the wealth of the country concentrated in the hands of a very small number of people. Extreme disparity of this kind is injustice and unfairness. It's the symptoms of a political economy where the societal diseases and the structural dysfunction of our political systems is not very different from the way it was in colonial times. The very top end has a disease which we might call affluenza, which is basically overconsumption. And the bottom end has another disease called povertitis, which is caused really by underconsumption. And these affluenza and povertitis basically lead to influenza and diseases of various types. Povertitis also leads to despair and alienation and violence, which is not in the interest of anyone. And this is an example of the kind of lives many people in our country lead. This woman and her entire family is represented in that picture. And what does it lead to? It leads to climate change and floods and droughts and deserts growing at an enormous rate, forest fires, species extinction. And one might say that today's vision of development really is violence, violence against people, violence against nature, and violence against our culture. So where do we go? From our heritage and our present predicament, we now need to look at the legacy that we will leave behind for future generations. In order to do that, we must nurture all types of capital, human capital, physical capital, financial capital, and of course, natural capital. And what do we do to create an India that is prosperous, inclusive, and, and sustainable, and hopefully resilient and regenerative? We need basically to change fundamentally our thinking into thinking about how can we be good ancestors for future generations. Just like our forefathers left behind a world for us, we now have to think about the future. To design new decision systems for a better future, we need a politics that values rights and fairness and diversity. We need a new economics that values equity as much as efficiency, the future as much as the past, and is able to handle systemic, nonlinear change. And this means that we have to have the right time horizons. Today, political leaders think in terms of term of office, 5 years maximum. Our business leaders think about time horizons of about 3 months, a quarter. Our laborer thinks from paycheck to paycheck, 1 month or so. Speculators are working on their investments on the order of 1 microsecond. But that's why we're in trouble. We have very short time horizons without having a look at what we do, the implications of what we do in the longer run. Engineers and foresters have 25 years, and a good ancestor, like we should be thinking in terms of generations. What is the impact of what we do today going to have in 5 generations' time? To create new institutions for a better future, we need small, local, decentralized solutions, local self-reliance, community-based institutions, and economies, empowering and participative political systems. And they need foresight and alternatives. We have to think longer term. We have to minimize unintended impacts. We need institutions which are responsive to people. And empowering innovation and action for a better future, we need different kinds of technologies that are very frugal in using resources, that are compatible with nature, which are in line with the need to improve human well-being as the primary goal. Civil society organizations are essential for this. You need independent thinking. You need a critique of the policies that exist. It should be a sector that is equal to the other 2 sectors. Sarkar, Bazaar, Samaj, they need to be partners in an ongoing relationship, building a better future from the past and present. And most important of all, the values that our nation espouses, a total society-wide commitment to leave a better world behind. We want to be the ancestor your children and their children will be proud of. Thank you. Now, may I just introduce, thank you. May I just introduce the next panelist, who's Dr. Camilla Roman. She's out there in Geneva, and I welcome you. Camilla, you must have got up pretty early in the morning, so let me invite you to say a few words about the impact and the possibility of creating this just transition from the point of view of work.
Many thanks, Dr. Ashok, and good afternoon, everyone. I hope you can hear me and see me well. It's great to be with you, at least virtually, for this very important event. And many thanks, Ashok, for this very insightful and inspiring introduction to the session. So I'd like to start by reflecting on the fact that climate and the world of work are not separated. We know that globally 1.2 billion jobs are dependent on healthy ecosystem services and a stable climate. And the poor are overly represented in those sectors. So there is a need to act, to move towards net zero and to move towards resilience. not only from a climate perspective, but also from an employment and a social perspective. Having said that, the kind of transformation that is needed to bring us to low carbon economies that are resilient to climate change are very far-reaching. And I think what Ashok was saying earlier about this systemic transformation is exactly right. We are not going to be able to get there with changes in a specific niche of the economy. We are going to have changes that are economy-wide. This will also mean that the impacts will be economy-wide, that there will be deep restructuring of labor markets, for example. We know and we expect that globally measures on energy alone would lead to the creation of 24 million jobs by 2030, but we will also see 6 million jobs lost. So on the one hand, there's good news. We are going to have a net job creation, but at the same time, we will have this deep restructuring that will affect various segments on society. So there will be changes that will have to be very carefully managed from a social point of view as well and a distributional point of view as well. That's why we need a just transition. A just transition is really bringing together the economic, social, and environmental dimension of sustainable development. It's about moving towards decarbonization and climate resilience while delivering decent work and social justice. And I think that this is crucial for the situation in India itself. We know that the agricultural sector, highly climate sensitive, is where the poor are overrepresented. We know the size of the informal economy in India, which means that large segments of the population don't have access to social protection that could help them cope with shocks. We also know that there are imperatives of poverty reduction and just and inclusive economic development for all. So how do we bring all of those priorities together? Is the answer can be a just transition. The ILO came with through representatives of governments, employers, and workers, delivered the ILO Just Transition Guidelines on a just, and these set out a framework and a set of principles to bring about a just transition. They go across the policy entry points across different areas, and they emphasize the need for them to be based on social dialogue and stakeholder engagement, because it is a society-wide approach that is required. What is important to remember to deliver a just transition is identifying the impacts of the transition, the climate transition. What are the impacts on employment and labor market? What are the distributional impacts in a certain economic and social context? Secondly, we need to plan. And here I would like to make reference again to the earlier speakers. It is important to plan also for the long term, not to have a short-term time horizon. We are not going to manage well change if we don't plan for it. Thirdly, we need policy coherence. And I think it's important to remind ourselves that we are not going to be able to deliver this kind of change only with actions that concern climate policies. We are going to need to have actions on employment policy. We're going to need to have action on social protection policies. We're going to need action on industrial policies. And these policies need to speak one another. If, for example, we've got renewable energy targets, and we are not accounting for the new skills requirements that are needed, these jobs will not materialize on the one hand, and on the other hand, we will miss those targets because we don't have the right labor force for that. Secondly, we need policy coherence from the national to the subnational and regional levels. The climate transition will not impact regions in a countries in the same manner. Of course, India is extremely diverse. The way that the climate transition will impact, for example, regions where mines or coal power plants are located will be different from the kind of transitions that we will have in coastal areas. It is necessary to identify what those impact, how those impact will play out, and to plan through social dialogue and stakeholder engagement all the way through, from the national to the local level. We need all hands on deck. The efforts by the government will be instrumental, and I think India has a very impressive track records on very ambitious policies that marry different goals. I'm thinking, for example, of NREGS or NREGA, that is combining poverty eradication goals together with the development of community assets and integrated environmental goals as well. But it's not just about government. We have to leverage the power of enterprises that are at the forefront of the transition and need to take into account this employment and social effect as they embark in their transition plans. We need to have workers' organizations on board and to provide their inputs and to participate in the process. And we need to engage with communities and through stakeholder engagement process, because without the kind of broad-based consensus that is needed for this kind of change, we will fall short of the very tall call that we are asked to deliver. So in this respect, I think it's high time to put just transition on the agenda. It is a paradigm that can bring about a meaningful shift because it connects the dots between environmental goals with economic and social aspirations and puts really decent work and social justice at the end, at the heart of climate action. Thank you very much.
Can you hear me? Thank you, Camilla. That was a terrific insight into the impacts of these transitions on the future of work, really, on labor and labor markets. And I appreciate your insights also on the small and medium enterprises that we have to now deal with. May I now ask Mr. R. Venkatesh, Managing Director of Wärtsilä, to take the floor.
Good afternoon to all of you, ladies and gentlemen here. Thank you, moderator, Mr. Khosla, for introducing the important topic of ensuring the transition towards the decarbonization. I want to also thank CII and ITC for organizing this summit where we are able to meet face-to-face and discuss these important elements also now after a gap of 2-3 years, all of you know. So maybe I'll, as moderator was shortly explaining, the 3 important elements of society, business, and government actually need to work together to bring in this transition. And I would maybe give some insights on the business part of it, how we as business can work together there to support each other and bring in the perspectives, which would need also support from the government, and then also it will help in the society finally. So as the topic is mentioning, Wärtsilä, the company which I represent, is a 180-year-old young company into various parts of global business. And in India, we are there 40+ years. We are into energy and marine sectors, supporting our customers and ensuring transition towards this decarbonization journey, which we are all embarked upon. So on the energy front, what we are looking at is looking at a 100% renewable energy future. So we have around 75 gigawatts of power plant installed all around the world, more than 80 energy systems, which are storage systems, which are very renewable supportive. And then we are present also in the 180+ countries around the world. So we are able to substantially contribute and support this transition together for our customers, which will bring into the economy also. So if I look at what would be the main key drivers on this transition, We need to, as many of us were discussing also in the other panels and in this forum also when we were discussing, we have to mitigate the climate change. That's increasing at a very fast pace, and indications are that if it goes in the same levels, we will be crossing more than 2 degrees within next 10, 15 years, which is not very good. And there we need to come up with different propositions, different aspects which we will need to see. What we see is also more electrification. That means electrification brings in more demand also. There is also growing demand for decarbonization from compliance perspective, from sustainability perspective. That's also an important driver here. And we also see increasing renewables, which is coming up, which is essential, which is important in our transition journey. With bringing in renewables, that also bring in some more challenges with us. So we need to tackle those also. So these are key drivers where we are looking at also when we are putting those dimensions and going forward, what are those coming up? And there brings up an accelerated need for future fuels and future dimensions where we will need to look on. If we look at India as a country, again, that needs also, we know solar is the future. We have been seeing the increase in the renewable sector coming up, and also an ambitious target of close to 500 gigawatt by 2030 is an important element from the governmental perspective. What we need is also in the ecosystem, we would need different components, different elements to manage these renewables which will come into play. So there, we would need to bring in battery storage solutions which are from different perspectives, hydro storage, different elements of storage solutions we should bring in. And also one of the elements is fuel storage also, which will come into play. Future fuels like hydrogen, ammonia will play a big role in this transition as well. And we need to also have flexible solutions which will balance these scenarios. So towards a net zero, when we are building, we need to also build up this ecosystem which actually should bring us also to lower costs of total solutions and future aspects, because economy of scale is also very important, which we should not forget. We have done a study together with Lapinranta University of Technology, which is a Finnish institute, which is into energy modeling, energy system studies. We have done close to 80, 90 countries, and one of the countries has been India, where we looked at also how we can look at future power system solutions for 2050. That brings us also good amount of mix into the solution, and there, by unlocking the different systems and solutions, when we go towards what we see is that by 2050, we are able to get down our cost of generation down by 40% or more. So that's the direction which we have to bring in, but we need to have different systems and solutions in place so that we can move towards that transition. What would we get out of this transition? We get a clean power system, which is very essential, and that way we move towards a clean energy direction. It increases the viability of the solutions, decreases the electricity cost, reduces reliance on imported fuels. Many of us know we are dependent on fuels from outside. That will reduce and would create new industry, which will also bring, as our colleagues was mentioning, it will bring in volumes of solutions, which will bring investment and also benefits on employment. So with a cost optimal carbon neutral system, what we want to see is we want to achieve also the financials and the economics of scale. Some few recommendations. Again, this is not holistic. We have to work on together with many of you in the CII and in the industry forums. We are seeing that we can influence this. What can we do to create this leap jump which we need in the coming future? We need to create these long-term targets, as we have set in 2030, 2050. We have a 2070 carbon net zero from India as a country. Maybe on a power energy sector, we may have to expedite that towards a 2050 dimension or so, because it's important to reach to that bigger goal. We need to drive renewables, consumption across various industries, so industry participation is very important. Industries need to be the pioneers, front runners here to build up that transition. And we need to also strengthen the supply side. So there, a lot of investments would be needed on research and technology development in developing these solutions more in-house. And then we need to also have incentive programs to support these for the future. So these are some elements that I want to drop here with you all, where we need to work together and bring in that perspective. And we are there supporting our customers, when with you all, we build towards this journey of decarbonization. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Venkateshji. It's very important insights on the way technology is going to play a major role, and we'll come back to that in the question period. May I now invite Chandrabhushan to share his thoughts with us on the subject.
Thank you, Ashok, and thank you, Seema, CII, for inviting me here. I want to start by saying that we have a problem, and the problem is, how do we define just transition? What is just? Everyone has, I mean to say, just think about the three previous presentations, Ashok. For you, the just is about transforming the society and thinking very differently. For our colleague from Switzerland, it is about jobs. And our colleague from Vatsila, it is about energy transition. So we have a definitional problem of how we define just transition. And what I'll do in my presentation is to give you some thought that we can take back, because till we are able to define what is just, we will not be able to put systems and processes and policy to achieve it. Let me start why we need to discuss just transition. And we all know about the climate crisis. The discussion has started because of the climate crisis, because fossil fuel jobs are going to go, and labor union, International Labor Union, essentially started this discussion that how do we do justice to fossil fuel workers. So the genesis of just transition is labor union activism, and that we need to understand. The entire discussion started with labor union. But I think we need to worry about just transition also from climate cost perspective. India is losing 3.5% of its GDP every year because of climate crisis. And which means that our growth, frankly, is if we are growing at 7% and you're losing 50% because of climate, we are growing at 3%. And you add air pollution problem, you add the other environmental costs that we are paying, practically we might not be growing. That's what the scenario is. But the fact is that climate is costing us. We are going to spend trillions of dollars in next 10 to 15 years just to build resilience in the society. So I think we need to talk about just transition, not only from labor perspective, but also from cost perspective. And as it was discussed before, if we are thinking about net zero by 2070, then the calculations are quite clear. We don't have to be genius in this case. Your coal consumption will have to go down by at least 80 to 90% in next 30 to 40 years. That's what it is. These are very simple mathematical modeling all of us can do on Excel sheet to understand what is the implications of a target, net zero target that India has given. But there is also a crisis in coal industry that we don't talk about in this country. We generally believe that coal is king, that today morning someone told me that we will have continuous coal production and consumption for next 30 to 40 years. But look at this data. 2/3 of all the coal mines in India are loss-making. In fact, 75% of coal India's limited production and almost all profit comes from just 35 mines. They have 420 mines, 425 mines. So there's a large number of coal mines in this country, 300 odd, that is on the verge of closure. And CIL wants to close it. It is losing huge amount of money. In fact, it is losing $2.5 billion every year in loss-making mines. Now, suppose tomorrow you close those 300 mines, what happens to the community? I'm not talking about workers. I'm talking about a district like Gumla. or Jamtara, or Bokaro, or Dhanbad, or Korba, or Angul. I don't know how many of you even know these districts exist, but they do. Those are the center of your energy system. And if 300 mines are going to close, then we need to talk about just transition of those communities. So therefore, the discussion on just transition is also linked to the economic health of your coal economy, your fossil fuel economy. And the third challenge, which was very, very brilliantly explained by, with the previous presentation, is that coal will not be able to compete with renewables. I think it is very clear. And the market is showing this. In fact, 70% of all the new investments are in renewable energy sector. But I am not worried about this. I am actually worried about the geopolitical implication of this transition, and more specifically, the implication of this transition on federalism. This is where our energy today comes from. This is the energy basket of India. But this is not where your renewable energy is growing. Your renewable energy is growing in Western and Southern India, but you're asking Eastern and Central India to close down coal plants. Why should they close? What are they going to get in return? So it is very easy for everyone or for us to say that we will close coal, get as much renewable as we want. Renewable is economically important, economically viable. All those things are correct. But we are not understanding the federal impact of this transition. What is it that the districts in Jharkhand, Orissa, Chhattisgarh, Madhya Pradesh will get in return for installing renewable in Kutch or in districts of Tamil Nadu? Now that discussion has to happen. And therefore, I don't want to call it just transition. Our language is very rich. And you can use any language to define just transition in India. Nyayak Parivartan, Nyay Sangat Parivartan, any language you can define. That the Parivartan is happening. How do we make it just is going to be the most important. I don't think anyone is questioning this Parivartan, this change which is going to take place. And therefore, for me, the definition of just transition is it has to be better than before. Jharkhand will close coal mines if we can give them a better deal than what they have right now. Any definition that you put for just transition, it has to be better than before. That's the bottom line. Better than before in jobs, better than before in economy, better than before in environment, better than before in social resilience. And therefore, we have coined this term called as 5 R's of just transition. You need to do 5 things. You need to restructure your economy. All the coal districts will have their economy restructured. You need to repurpose the land and infrastructure. Coal companies have 0.4 million hectares of land with them. What will you do with that land? So you will have to repurpose land and infrastructure. You have to skill and reskill workforce. You have to build a resilient economy and infrastructure against climate change. And you have to make environment and social investment that is responsible. You don't want to do the same mistake of the past. Now, this is a huge agenda. Basically, if you want just transition, you have to change everything that you are doing right now. And why should we start right now? Because it is going to take time. It is not going to be easy. It is not going to be simple. It will take decades to do. It's not going to happen tomorrow. And I always show this example of Ruhr in Germany. We all read in geography book how important steel and coal was in Ruhr in Germany. But if you look at it, it took 50 years for Ruhr from peak of coal production to closing of all the mines. 60 years. At the peak, Ruhr had 500,000 people. When it closed down, it took 60 years. That is the amount of time it took for Germany to make a transition. I don't think we have that much time, but if we don't start now, maybe we will never be able to do this transition. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chandrabhushan. That was terrific. Let me ask Camilla, if you're still online. how would you translate the 5 Rs that Chandrabhushan just talked about into action on the ground in terms of the small and medium enterprises you were talking about? Are you can
Yes, thank you for that questions. And yeah, of course, the first point is that we need to map what the impacts of the transition for small and medium enterprises will be. It will be, again, dependent on the structure of the economy in a specific region or in the specific sector where such enterprises are located. Secondly, you would need to do a gap analysis both in terms of the policy environment that needs to be enabling and the skills, including management skills and support services that are needed. Third, you need to turn that into the positives. So having identified the gaps, coming up with the solutions. What kind of policy incentives and regulations are needed that can cater to the needs of small and medium enterprises that clearly have capacity constraints in making the transition? What kind of business development services are required, be it in terms of technology, be it in terms of management skills, be it in terms of technical and vocational training for the workers and certification schemes, so that small and medium enterprises can really take advantage of the kind of new business opportunities in emerging green markets. And lastly, you would need to work together with financial institutions to secure access to finance, because we know that MSMEs are the gaps in terms of financing are still huge. On the one hand, I think one has to improve access to finance for MSMEs in general. So you need the kind of reform and the kind of partnership across public and private sector to do that. But secondly, we need to make sure that the green finance that is starting to flow also reaches developing countries and emerging economies. We know that right now it's overly located in developed countries, and B, that it also trickles on to micro, small, and medium enterprises. And how do we do that? Do we need to work? We need to work on the risking, but we also need to work on building the capacities of the intermediaries to then being able to bridge that gap that is not there yet. So working, bridging the kind of needs that are out there for small and medium enterprises, I think it's a key priority, considering that the bulk of employment in India and in other countries is really located there. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We have time only for 2 short questions and 2 short answers. May I invite anybody in the participants in the room to ask? Please state your name and the person you're directing your question to. Is there anyone who would like to ask a question? Can we see anyone? Lady at the back.
I'm Preeti Malhotra from Ensign Global Solutions. The R's that were presented, is any kind of conversation happening with the government in India on how to move forward, or it is still a very programmatic approach that is being followed instead of a transformative one?
Maybe.
Well, there is a lot of discussion happening in India on just transition right now, but it is largely focused with coal ministry. The discussion is not viewed like this discussion to be much more broad-based. And I think industry has to start this discussion, because you are going to be a very critical, most important piece of this just transition puzzle. So right now, the discussion of 5R and everything is happening with coal ministry, because coal is at the forefront of climate decarbonization target in the country. But more needs to happen.
Maybe I can complement to what Rima was mentioning. There are the recent last 1.5 years discussions which are happening are very promising. And in the last 6 months after the COVID has gone away, there are also a lot of working groups which has been created on the different ministries, on the petroleum ministry, on the oil and gas ministry, on the energy ministry, different. And there is an MNRE group also working towards building up this and balancing and looking at solutions on that. So there is work started, but as rightly said, we need to contribute more there, and then together with industry and business, they are expecting that to happen more, and there we need to put forward our thoughts also and bring in this transition together. And the time is now. We need to do it now because it takes time to transition. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. We have time for one short question, which will get a short answer. There's a gentleman. Yes.
Good afternoon. My name is Chandra Kumar. I represent ClimeUp.ai. Sir, interesting facts like put forward, right, in terms of coal and the mines data that you put it, right? So from energy, I mean, the fuel consumption perspective for metal making units, right? Basically the smelters, or probably it could be on the steel making. We know that there is a national steel policy, and then there is a conversion from BOF to EAF part of it, right? Where do you think India would stand probably at the end of this agenda from a cost competitiveness? Like when you plot Indian players, the top steel makers, where do they stand in terms of cost curve?
If I got it right, you were talking about cost competitiveness in decarbonizing the steel sector, right?
Right.
Yeah. I think we need to get level with on this issue, because Europe is talking a lot about decarbonization in the steel sector. There's one factory which has moved to hydrogen. Europe is largely a secondary steel market, which is they use a lot of recycled steel. 90% of Indian steel is primary steel. Okay, so decarbonizing the steel sector is not going to be through only hydrogen route. I think it is being hyped up a lot. There are many, many other ways and other technology that will come to decarbonize. But most importantly, we need to think about substitute for steel. Okay, there are other materials that are much more sustainable than steel and cement. So while the steel industry can keep talking about decarbonizing the steel sector, as a society, we have to start looking at sustainable material itself. And, Ashok, that's what the main issue is.
Thank you. Did you want to answer? Thank you. I think we've had a terrific session on many aspects of the transition. And I think the last point that Chandrabhushan just made is what I'd like to leave you with, and that is we've got to now attack not just the symptoms, but the root causes. We've got to get to understand the structure of our economy is geared to creating all these problems. And if we don't change the structure and the distributional aspects, we will continue to have these problems. So I want to thank you all, and I hope you will have a great lunch. And we're going to close the session at this point. Thank you.
We thank our distinguished dignitaries for an enriching discussion.